Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Friday, the 18th of August, comes to you from London. And we start, as always, by looking at currencies, and first of all, the dollar index. And the dollar is falling away. Here we see on the cloud, we're just coming back below the cloud on the 60-minute chart, putting us back into bearish territory. So we're just struggling to hold on to those gains that we saw earlier in the week. And it looks like we're finishing the week on a low note for the dollar. And the euro hasn't actually managed to cross back above the cloud, so it's still a bit bearish short term as well. In fact, most of that dollar move is against the Japanese yen, and we see here dollar falling away quite sharply against the yen. Downside targets of 0.5%, 1.4%, and this downside target of 10% downside not yet activated, but looming over us if we move below the 108 level. If we look at sterling, recovering slightly on a weaker dollar, but still very much teetering along the bottom here. And against the euro, sterling still bearish on all three time frames, testing these lows that we saw last year. So at the moment, the euro looking still pretty bad. Against the Swiss franc, just slightly up this morning, but again bearish below the cloud on all three time frames. And against the Aussie dollar, falling away as well. So sterling not looking great. The big moves last night were in the US stock market. The S&P fell off very significantly, taking a new intra-week low. So we see that on the long-term and medium-term charts, that's taking it within the stride, but this is a very big down day. So we did have a bad day. We've activated a downside target of about 3%. So we could see more on this sell-off yet. Nasdaq not making a new low against the low earlier in the week, but even so, we are still looking below the cloud here, and we do have downside potential of between 0.7 and 2%. Interestingly, we are just still again holding the upside trends. The Dow, which has been more resilient than most markets, also falling to new lows for the week, and that's actually taken us below the cloud as well. So whilst we look better on the long and medium term charts, it is still bearish. The Russell 2000 index, that is making new lows, and so that is very bearish compared to the other markets, and we are just seeing here medium term that this is negative. So we're just seeing on the broader market 2,000 stocks that this is falling away. So that is bad for the market when the breadth is negative like that. The S&P future also making new lows, down very slightly this morning, and the Nasdaq E-mini also similarly down very slightly. So a bit early to say how the markets will open based on those futures, but at the moment they're not showing any signs of a sharp bounce back. The FTSE 250. FTSE 100 is bearish below the cloud, selling off this morning, and the FTSE 250 much the same picture as well. So we are just seeing UK markets falling away, and the DAX also going lower too. The Nikkei is lower on that stronger yen. So we are just seeing the yen, of course, being a safe haven trade. We are seeing that having an effect on Japanese earnings. So we are seeing the Nikkei falling. And the Hang Seng, much the same thing, falling away there. Shanghai actually up slightly, very, very slightly, 0.01%, but holding its position much the same. The Sensex also not selling off as heavily as well. The Australian market selling off back below the cloud on the short term, but really stuck in a rut when you look at this sideways move of the last few months. Crude oil up just again on global uncertainty, so crude is rising a little bit there. Not quite back into bullish territory, but we are at $51.23. The medium to long term outlook is still questionable for crude. We're hitting quite a lot of resistance here. No clear downside targets on the long term chart. There is this one of 41.74, but we do have upside targets as well. So it's not a dead cert, but we know that crude does fall in the second half of the year normally, and we're seeing WTI much the same thing. US nat gas sitting steady at 2.93. And we're seeing copper also just recovering quite strongly here. Just felt like a sell-off yesterday, but bouncing back today. So a lot of volatility there in the copper market. If we look at things like cocoa, we're seeing cocoa up quite strongly, 3%. Coffee down 2%. So a really mixed picture. Sugar up 2.7%, but bearish below the cloud. Wheat is slightly up, but again bearish, as are soya beans, and corn. So we're seeing the softs generally still looking pretty bearish. Of course, the big news has been gold. The gold chart here, we see gold is just breaking out. That's activated this new upside target of 1367. That's 5.7% upside. So that is really bullish for the metal, the yellow metal. And interestingly, the downside target is coming off this chart. If we can hold this position today at the close, that will remove that downside target, which is bullish for gold. And the long-term chart still looks pretty good with upside targets of 18 and 32%. So gold is looking strong in all this uncertainty, and that comes as no great surprise. But we have been calling gold higher for some time, and this morning's move is significant. Looking at silver, we see much the same thing. We haven't activated the short-term upside target, but it's looking more bullish as well. Taking a look at US Treasury yields, it's just bearish below the clouds, so the yield is falling. We're sitting at 2.2%. Tech, we did see a sell-off yesterday. Apple holding on quite well. Google, we've been worried about and still below the cloud. Amazon also, we've been showing is bearish below the cloud on the short term. And Facebook did actually just go into a sort of bearish move yesterday below the cloud. But interestingly, we are sort of stuck in this 166, 172 range at the moment. So it's too early to call. And of course, long term, we've got fabulous upside targets. And Microsoft is just holding on. It did sell off quite heavily, but holding its position. That's it for today. Have a great weekend. Until Monday, happy charting. See you then.